Good morning, everybody. Good morning to our panelists.
Good morning.
Miriam has introduced you, but if you could just tell a little bit more about yourselves to the audience, and then we'll jump into the questions.
Hi there, I'm Denise Fort. I'm the president and CEO of the Education Trust. We are a national nonprofit that works to reduce opportunity gaps for students of color and students from low-income communities.
And I am Catherine Lehman. I'm Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights at the U.S. Department of Education. My job is to be the Chief Civil Rights Enforcer in the nation's schools, and that means that we protect against sex, race, and disability discrimination in P-12 schools, as well as in colleges and universities that receive federal funds, which is all colleges and universities and all public P-12 schools.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Ivory Tolson. I've been a professor at Howard University since 2005. I also serve as the editor-in-chief of the Journal of Negro Education, which was founded in 1932, the oldest continuously published academic journal for Black people. Previously, I served the Obama administration along with my good friend Catherine as executive director of the White House Initiative on HBCUs. And recently, I took on the responsibility of chief of research for Concentric Education Solutions, which is a company that helps students to more meaningfully engage with schools.
All right, thank you. Thank you all. We know what the topic is about. We're going to dive right into the discussion. The first question, if each of you could answer this. Let's start off with a look at what equity in education means. We know a vision is a picture of a preferred future or a preferred reality. Paint a picture of what, when we're there, equity in education will look like or should look like. You want to start?
Well, the Education Trust, we really think that an equitable system looks like a well-resourced system, one that really centers students first, that gives students what they need, individualized learning, but also at the highest of standards. And when we're thinking about resources, it's everything from that great teacher, it's everything from a safe and secure building, education technology, making sure that they are learning to the highest standards. That's what a system of equity really looks like for us. We've been working hard with communities across the country to really dig into that and use research and data to help them understand what the inequities look like, how they can impact them, and how they can design systems to solve for that. And we're seeing some really good success that I'll share with you a little later, but it is amazing what the power of advocacy has in communities across the country these days to really design and build equitable systems for all kids. And we're really excited about it. We have a long way to go, but there's real opportunity there.
Thank you.
And I'll build on that. I really appreciate the frame of what will it look like when we get there, because we haven't gotten there yet. The reality is that in this country, we have inconsistently and infrequently lived the promise that the Supreme Court gave us in 1954 in Brown versus Board of Education, that we should have equal schooling for all students regardless of race. And this summer, we will live our 6th decade of a congressional promise that no person will experience discrimination on the basis of race, color, or national origin. And then subsequently, Congress enacted laws promising no person will experience discrimination on the basis of sex, and that no person will experience discrimination on the basis of disability. And we know that promise that no person will experience that discrimination is not the lived experience at the desktop for students all over the country. The reality is that today our schools are in many places more segregated than they were in 1954 when the Brown versus Board of Education decision came down. The beautiful truth is that since Brown, we no longer have schools segregated by law, and that is an important distinction. But we do have very many kids attending public schools where most of the children who are in school with them are their same race. And that is not what we intended with the congressional promise that we enacted as a country 10 years after the Brown decision, because integration had been so slow in coming in so many parts of the country following Brown. That not to give you too much of a history lesson, but that there was widely understood massive resistance across the South to integrate, as the Supreme Court had promised that schools would do. And then we had regular resistance across the rest of the country to that integration, and we still have that now. So we don't live the promise that Congress has given to all of us and that the United States Supreme Court has decreed for all of us, and it is worthwhile to keep working toward that. So we know, what will it look like when we get there? What it will look like is that no person will experience discrimination on the basis of race, sex, disability in school, and that every child will have schools that are prepared to meet the aspiration dreams of those children, and that are resourced sufficiently to meet them. So it's my job and the 600 people in the office that I lead, at the Office for Civil Rights around the country, to investigate and enforce that promise, and to make sure that more and more places are more persistently actually teaching that promise for all students. So I'm happy to tell you about some of the recent resolution agreements and some of the progress that we're seeing made, but I do think it's important for all of us to recognize where we are today, and that despite very lofty aspirations, our kids are learning in conditions that differ significantly from those aspirations.
Yeah, it's a very compelling question. I like how you pushed us to look into the future. It reminded me of a question I asked a group of superintendents and principals and school board members in Virginia. Asked them, I said, how many of you all would like every school in Virginia to be functioning at the highest level possible? And they all raised their hands. And I said, well, if that happened, how would you know if your child was going to the best school? And they all seemed to get uncomfortable. No one had the courage to say it wouldn't matter, and that seems pretty simple. If all of them are operating at the highest level, it wouldn't matter if your child is at the best school, because every school is the best school. But it does speak to how people who are in charge of our school systems are thinking about education in terms of the haves and the have-nots. And when I think about the future of education, I would like to see us do away with this mentality that every child needs to be on this certain system. They need to be operating somewhere on the bell curve. We need to look at them in terms of percentile rankings. We need to identify these deficits and categorize students into those that are doing well versus those who aren't doing well, or those who are in good schools versus bad schools. We need to figure out a way for us to use the technology that exists, the data, the research, the natural changes that's happening in our society, like globalism, the diversity that we have right now, the technology, the automation, and figure out a way to make education more of a humanistic process than this exercise of whose brain is developed better. And I think that there are ways, innovative strategies that we can take in order to create the kind of education system that can benefit us. But it's this mentality of my child needs to have this, so your child be, that is holding us back from the best version of our education system.
Thank you. Let's go a little deeper into that. The next question was going to be about what do you see as the current state of equity? We could talk all day about that. I would like for you all to discuss that, each of you, but also talk about what you see being done, whether it's through your organization or just out there somewhere that is addressing issues of equity and promoting equity.
Do you want to start, Ivory?
The current state of equity. So when I was in school back in the 80s and 90s, the K through 12 population was about 80% white. Now it is less than 50% white and is getting more and more diverse. So we have heard a lot about schools remaining segregated, and there's a lot of validity to those observations. But I think the more important reality is that our schools are more diverse than they've ever been in our history, and they're growing in diversity. And so that does push us to look at diversity differently than in terms of black and white like we did in the 80s. We have to look at a diversity of not only different races, but also different socioeconomic groups. One of the things that I've advocated is doing away with terms like marginalized and under-resourced and things like that. I call them an acronym called SCID. That's socially, culturally, and economically diverse systems or schools. So I think the state of equity right now is a product of diversity that we have, but it's also a system where people are trying to hold on to the status quo because it has benefited whatever category they were in for such a long time. So I think I have some optimism that because of new technologies being developed, the new diversity, and globalism, the ways in which we can reach across the earth right now, that we have a lot of opportunities if only we can get out of our own way of making those things happen.
My office has, since 1968, collected data from all the schools all the K-12 schools in the country. And the most recent data collection was a universal collection, which means that we have data for every student in every school in the country. And I'm just going to give you a little bit of the indicators that we have to be able to talk about why we know that we don't offer equitable schooling for all students. Just to start, only 48% of the nation's high school offer calculus to anyone. 48%, so fewer than half of the nation's high schools even offer calculus, which puts aside the question of whether they offer enough opportunities for all the students to take it or the courses in sequence to be prepared to take it, but fewer than half of our schools offer what is typically a prerequisite course for a 4-year college education. Then we look at black students. Black students are 15% of high school enrollment, and they are 7% of the students taking calculus in the fewer than half of the schools that offer it. And they are 6 and 8% of students taking advanced placement math and science courses in those schools. So well under their participation in the nation's high schools, they are also under their own participation rates in high rigor courses that are essential for admission to four-year institutions. So just starting with those statistics, we know that the offerings in our schools are not equitable, and we are not communicating expectations to every child in every school that college is for you, that we expect you to succeed and we're ready for you. Then I'll take a look at what we see in our investigations. Last fiscal year alone, our fiscal year ends September 30th. Last fiscal year alone, we resolved 3,001 race discrimination cases across the country. And we took in a total of just in excess of 19,000 complaints across all of the jurisdictional areas that we address. So huge quantum of concerns coming to our office from families about conditions of schooling for their students. And we identified extraordinary discrimination for students in schools. Not, I think, because school leaders come to school because they want to hurt kids, right? I actually think people come to schools because they want to deliver an equity promise. But still, we are seeing shocking instantiations of harm visited on kids, in particular with respect to race harassment, where it happens in schools, which is probably unsurprising to us, but then schools don't respond as the law demands to ensure that a hostile environment doesn't exist and is remedied where one occurs. And just to give you a couple very recent examples, we very recently resolved an investigation in a California school district of a school where we confirmed that a middle school student whose family came to this country from a country in Africa. I'm not identifying the country and the school district because this kid would be identifiable as a result, but came to this country from a country in Africa, and peer students at the school showed her pictures of malnourished children in Africa and asked if they were her relatives, and informed her that they would be willing to date her if she had lighter skin color, and called her monkey, called her the N-word, repeatedly used slurs against her within hearing of her teachers, within hearing of other students, and the school district generally didn't respond at all. One time, one adult spoke to one of the students, which resulted in peer retaliation against her for having reported. She was frequently, she had suicidal ideation. She frequently skipped class and was in the bathroom to hide from the harassment that was going to continue for months unabated from her district. And her family asked the school to evaluate her for disability, to identify supports. They didn't do it for months. When they finally did, they didn't evaluate whether the harassment had had an impact on her ability to access education. And they left that child, they left that baby in school to run a gauntlet of harassment without support, without response, and without redress for her. So they've taken phenomenal steps now for what to do, how to fix it for her, and also how to ensure that nothing like that persists in school going forward. But that was almost a full school year for that student where the adults saw it, heard it, and did not intervene for her. And that's shocking to me and astonishing that we see it so often in schools around the country. So I find that enormously distressing, but I also don't want to end the story with how bad things are. I want to also tell you some things that are good. So we also very recently resolved an investigation where a white teacher in a school, and this school had 6 Asian students in it. White teacher with an Asian student in the class put an image of Kim Jong-un on the board and asked kids in the class whether he looked like the one Asian student in the class, and invited them to mock the one Asian student in the class, which was horrifying. When that family reported that to the principal intervened immediately. He asked the family, do you want me to ask the teacher to apologize in front of the class? The student said no, that would be too embarrassing. He offered some other remedies. Ultimately, they settled that the principal would come to the class and talk to the kids about appropriate treatment for other people, how to not make fun of other people, who we are and how we celebrate everybody for who we are. Put the teacher on administrative leave, wrote that into the teacher's file that nothing like that could happen again, and there would be employment consequence should it happen again. Did a training for the entire school, just did all the things that you would want to happen. When something as shocking and appalling as that happened in school, this school responded as it should. So we didn't find a violation of the law because the school responded as it should. And I say that to say, discrimination is going to occur. We know that that's true. That is our unfortunate history. We want our adults to be there when it does, and to be there appropriately to stand for kids. And in this instance, we saw an adult who did.
Wow, I'm struck by all of that.
Yes.
But thank you for the work that you're doing. The state of equity in our country, I think, can be dissected on a couple different levels. I think we have really focused on what matters for the students. And when you think about that, that is about a well-resourced system. We know throughout the country that there's anywhere from a 1,900 to around 2,300 per pupil difference between well-resourced schools and under-resourced schools. That's across the country. We know that kids who are in classrooms taught by diverse educators, all kids, all students do better, but we know that the state of teacher diversity is very uneven across the country. We know that students do well when they have higher engagement by having access to advanced coursework such as AP and IB and dual enrollment classes that really give students a full and well-rounded experience. We know they do better in systems like that. They are more engaged, they graduate on time, their attendance is better at schools, but that also is very uneven across the country. We know that access to high quality pre-K is very uneven, particularly for Black and brown students across the country. We know that when you're looking at the system of higher education, the same thing applies. So what we really need to be thinking about here is how we start to even the playing field across all those different levels. And there are ways to do that. We know from the research, we know from the data that with a well-resourced system, and again, resources across all those different levels, we start to see a more equitable system for students across the country.
Okay, if we could take a few more minutes to dig a little deeper in that, all these really compelling comments. What are some things in K through 12 in that sphere in higher ed that are working or that may be localized or in some cases, but can be scaled perhaps Maybe just one or two or three things if each of you could share.
Yeah, we're really excited about the number of states that are starting to look at their school funding systems and have decided that they need to make them more equitable. We saw tremendous investments in Massachusetts, in Maryland, Tennessee more recently, Michigan, Texas, where we really are going to have to get down to brass tacks is see how well that's implemented, because it's not just about how much more money you're putting into the system, but how those dollars are spent. But nonetheless, we're seeing some real opportunity in those states, and we're excited by that. I think the other thing that is showing a lot of promise is there are a number of states who are now investing in the science of reading, which we do know that, again, when well implemented, we're seeing an increase in early literacy rates. And I think that's super exciting because the reading crisis in this country is really a civil rights problem. And it's something that we need to address head on if we want our kids to be able to experience and take advantage of the new technology that's going to be out there. So I think these investments in the science of reading have a lot of promise as well.
And I'll confess that I tend to see what doesn't work more often than I see what does in the line of work that I'm in. But I will say it's very gratifying to me to see the leaders who stand for kids every day in school and who show up and are there to communicate to kids that they believe in them and that they will be there for them. And we often see in the cases that we investigate really excellent practices within a school system that could be replicated in other places. And so that's also enormously gratifying. I've been talking a lot about K-12. I want to shift a bit to higher ed just to look at the moment that we're in. We had a sea change last summer from the United States Supreme Court in race-conscious admissions in college and universities that are selective. And we are now working on a new reality that after the Supreme Court upended some 4 decades of practice in many schools' admissions decisions. And we have seen in this last year some school systems coming up with other lawful ways to ensure that they will still admit, support, and graduate diverse classes. And I think that's very exciting now to see that commitment and to see compliance with the law while also finding ways to encourage all students from all walks of life to come to school. So just to take a couple of examples, there's a California state system that has committed to admitting any student from 26 local school districts that have a C average or higher in their courses. And so those kids are told in 9th grade that you are admitted to the Cal State system. You will go to college. And they're told they can come during the summer to take classes, have a college-going experience, and to learn about what it means to study, learn about what it means to be prepared, learn about what college expectations are. So they see themselves in college and they know they can go to college. And they have, well before starting in 11th grade, they have financial aid conversations with the Cal State system so that they know that they can pay for it and they know what's available to them so they can imagine themselves in college. I think that's incredibly exciting, and it's notable that the 26 districts that the system is reaching out to are districts heavily populated with English learners, heavily populated with immigrant kids, heavily populated with kids who would be the first in their family to go to college. And that, so it's real recruitment, and it's a real way to make sure that kids see themselves in a particular future and imagine that school is for them and they know they can go. So I love that. I think that's really exciting. I also saw last year the Cal State system, Caltech decided they recognized our data, so I love when people use it, but they recognize the data that not all the schools are offering calculus. I mentioned that not all the schools are offering high rigor math courses, and so the Caltech system, it's Caltech, so those are pretty high, basic, typical prerequisites for them, and so they created a different pathway for kids. If they didn't have those courses in their high schools, that they still could be admitted to Caltech. It's a baby step because they have to show some other mastery before they come, which is not my ideal way for a school to really recruit everybody to come, but it's an important baby step, and I love that they thought about it and that they're responsive to the actual experience for students in school. So there's some really exciting things that are systems-wide, and there's daily ways that teachers and educators stand for kids every day, and I love that too.
Yeah, one of the things I learned from analyzing many data sets and looking at success factors, specifically for African American males, but of course it generalizes across many different students. But I've looked at data that looked at those students who are achieving well versus those who are struggling across many different factors. The broad category of those factors was personal and emotional factors, school-related factors, family factors, and social environmental factors. But one of the things that I learned in looking at this data and also cross-checking that with people in the schools is that a lot of the solutions are a lot simpler than we seem to acknowledge. A lot of times we think that we need to have this complex thing. We need to spend all of this money. Money does matter, but a lot of times the way that the money is spent isn't anything that is really helping the students. One of the things I learned in looking at this data, specifically on personal and emotional factors, happy students are good learners. And so if schools focused on the happiness of their students, made sure that when they came through the door, what makes you feel good in the morning? Music, smiles, encouragement, those types of things. So if schools just started there, right? That's not that complicated, right? Food is important. Focus on your breakfast programs and your lunch programs. Extracurricular activity is important. And all of this is validated by the data. Students who are involved in extracurricular activities, especially school-based extracurricular activities, are doing better in school. In terms of their relationship with their teachers, the data that I've examined and published showed that teachers who are perceived as the smartest or the most helpful and things like that aren't necessarily the teachers that's making the biggest impact. It's the teachers where the students perceive that the teachers care about them as people. The teachers that acknowledge their humanity. So I think in terms of solutions, if we started at the basics first, if we looked at what makes any normal human being thrive better in their environment, just break it down to the Maslow's hierarchy of needs and some of the things that we learn in undergraduate psychology and other types of classes like that, then we can come with at least a basic set of principles. A lot of times we focus on practices, so we want these standards of practice. We need to shift from standards of practice to standards of principle. Because if we had the core values of growth mindset, things like that, then I think naturally we would do what's in the best interest of our students.
Thank you. Practices, principles. Let's talk about policy next. But and this is so
I like
so
that.
enlightening.
Nice alliteration there.
As an entree to the question, it's hard for I suppose any average, sane, reasonable person to disagree with the idea of equity, fairness, et cetera. How much of resistance or disagreement is about equity itself, and how much is about how you achieve it, how you get there? And along those lines, what are some local, state, national policies that are in place or that should be in place that can help everybody, more people embrace the ideal of equity and the possibility of equity?
That's such a provocative question. I think that, what everybody really wants is for each student to be celebrated in the way that they need to be celebrated in order to have the opportunities that are available to all students. No one should disagree with that. I think when it comes down to the practice of it, there's always this sense of one student's getting more than another or something's being taken away from another student. But when you really dig into diversity, equity, and inclusion, when you really dig into what is equitable, it's really about allowing each and every student to shine. I think, at the state and local and even at the federal level, there are a lot of different policies that are available to encourage that kind of work. There's a lot of work going on around chronic absenteeism and how we can bring more students and keep them more engaged in going to school and having them feel a sense of belonging and inclusion. I think that's very powerful. I also think the role of teachers, and as Ivory said, having that one adult relationship in the classroom, at school, on a college campus can do everything for a student. So there are a lot of different policies at play that are having some real success, and it's really about seeing those in practice. I think the more that we can see those policies in practice, the more that we can see some real examples of what's giving students that total opportunity, the better off we'll be.
You know, I really agree with your point, Denise, that no one should disagree with the goal for equity. But we see that there are many among us who do disagree with that goal, and who are sometimes governors, sometimes state superintendents, sometimes leaders of school systems, and that division is incredibly dangerous. Lamont, you started with the question, what policies do we need in place? I think we have incredibly powerful policies in place that Congress has promised to all of us, and no person will experience discrimination. I mean, it's incredibly simple. It's also incredibly beautiful, and it's not what many of some school leaders, many state leaders advocate for their kids, and I think that is so scary, and I think it is so dangerous that we are in a cycle in American history where it is permissible, sometimes comfortable, sometimes encouraged to incite division of that type, and to suggest that we can pick and choose the children that we will protect, and we can pick and choose the people who have rights in our country. And that's not our guarantee. That's not what our Congress has promised us. That's not our national aspiration, and it's not the law that I enforce, and it's not the way that we will enforce the law. And so, we're very pleased to be that federal backstop against harm, and to communicate all across the country what is our constitutional guarantee, that where there is a conflict between state or local law and federal law controls. Yeah. So we are very, very pleased to understand and enforce the beautiful law that Congress writes for every student, every day, everywhere, when they need us.
I think where policy gets complicated in the education system in the United States is that it's too rigidly focused on things like test scores and this narrow set of metrics of success. And I think that policy needs to open up more broadly to different types of success and achievement and different types of experiences that students should be having in school in order to make them the best person. You don't become the best person by scoring high on the NAEP assessment of reading and mathematics. And so I think policies just need to open up and think more broadly about the total student experience.
Okay. I see our time is winding down under 2 minutes. I'm going to let you pick from one of two questions. What you want to pick. To what extent is student loan debt an equity issue? Aside from student loan forgiveness federal, is there something that colleges and universities should directly do? I hope somebody answers that. The other one is, what are your final thoughts on anything else that could or should be done to achieve educational equity? I'll let you pick whichever question, or both if you have. We have 1 minute and 22 seconds.
We'll solve it. Look, student loan debt is a really big problem in this country, and it's holding so many young people and adults back from the opportunities of the American dream. Because of student loan debt, students are having to put off the idea of marriage, of families, of buying a home. Fortunately, the Biden-Harris administration has been doing some really significant work in that area, which is helping students of color, families of color, students from low-income communities really start to have that burden lifted from their shoulders, because it is a very big burden, and those communities are being the ones that have been most impacted. Student loan debt, if we can solve something around college affordability, we need to double the Pell Grant. We need to look at ways that more states are investing in higher education so that more students have that opportunity. We would really go a long way. I took up too much time, sorry about that.
Well, amen to all of that. And I am very pleased to be part of an administration that is working so hard on this very core equity issue. I think, just to add to that, we also want to look at the lens of the value of the education that students are incurring that debt for. So, was it worth it to go? And are we supporting students to be able to succeed, preparing them and also encouraging them to be there? So, I think we have to have a whole lens in addition to reducing the quantum of debt. On the other end, we want to make sure that more students are participant in the higher education experience and benefiting from that experience as well.
Yeah, and I want to respond to that by having us look in the mirror, because right now we are not celebrating low-cost options for higher education. There are low-cost options out there,
right.
But how much complicity do we have in looking at the most expensive universities and saying that that's a good school and we want a student that graduated from there? How complicit are we in having ranking systems that only celebrate these schools that have this enormous tuition and keep going up and up and up and up, and it seems as high as they raise their tuition, the higher their rankings go. So we do have to consider.
Time is up. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No, keep. We're barely over. No, keep going. Keep going. Keep going. I'm kidding. That was a joke.
So celebrate HBCUs, celebrate community colleges, celebrate regional state universities, and our low-cost options in higher education.
I really was kidding. Was there anything else seriously you wanted to say?
No, that was it.
Kidding.
That was it.
My jokes never land, but that one did.
Our time is up.
Thank you all so much. I wish we had so much more time. Well, Marion's not back in. Anybody else want to say anything else? Wow.
But we did all focus on the student debt question, and I'll just say, you asked what are the other equity things that we should be focused on. There's no shortage of inequity. So anywhere that you care about an equity issue, I hope you are finding a way to serve and to help. And that can be through volunteerism. It doesn't have to be at your kid's school. Somebody's kid's school will benefit from you. Yeah. And it doesn't matter what your particular interest is. There are so many points of entree.
Thank you for that. Thank you. And any other final thoughts?
I think that was off.
All right. Saved by the Marion. Thank you all so much. Thank you. Thank you.